Brockhampton, Iridescence, man. So yeah, Brockhampton, you guys, I'm sure you know who they are. They're one of the most exciting acts in rap right now. You know, they had the Saturation Trilogy last year. They fucking blew up off that, gathered a pretty sizable following. However, the transition from that Saturation Trilogy to now to this new record has been a bit shaky for them, given the constant name changes and the release date pushbacks and the fucking singles that came out that were kind of lackluster, the controversy surrounding the Amir Van departure. It's not really been a smooth ride, you know, for the group, but all of this has led me to be really curious to see where they would go musically with this new album. And with Iridescence, Brockhampton seemed to have traded out the very catchy, linear, formulated songwriting approach that they had mastered to a T on the Saturation Trilogy, and swapped it for an album that is incredibly off the fucking wall and frantic and unpredictable. It's quite the scatterbrained album, and I think the cover art, the thermal vision aesthetic they seem to have going on, pretty accurately reflects sort of how the music sounds. It's just like a blurred mesh of just washed out colors and shit. It's nothing really too focused, you know? This is the kind of album that will jump from something really brash and violent to something really inspiringly gorgeous in a matter of seconds, and it does that numerous times. And you could argue that this more kind of off-the-wall approach does result in an album that's less cohesive, has a pretty awkward flow, stuff like that. There's not really as much musical focus on this thing. I can understand that, but personally for me, I think ultimately this approach benefited this album. Now, it does have some glaring problems that are pretty obvious in regards to its flow and its structure and stuff like that, but I still think the general focus of Iridescence is kind of in a similar vein as to what they were doing on the Saturation Trilogy. With this album, we are still getting a series of very creative, bombastic, catchy, and striking rap songs delivered by a plethora of very talented musicians who are all telling their individual personal stories about dealing with mental health and fame and family troubles and childhood, etc. The general goal and content of this thing doesn't seem to be too outside of the norm for the group. It's just being presented in a much more musically daring and frantic way here. The very fragmented presentation of this album's production, it almost feels nihilistic in a way at points. This thing has everything from esoteric vocal samples to breakbeat drums to elegant strings. It's fucking crazy. And whether this more untamed approach to the production is a positive thing would be completely subjective, of course. There are some moments where there are some musical ideas that did rub me the wrong way, but ultimately, I think this album has a really provocative identity that I just can't help but be allured by on every list. I also think this approach does a great job at showing just how vast the range and diversity and creativity this group has. Like with Saturation 1, when that came out, it's like, oh my god, the amount of potential these guys have is really exciting, and I think I got that same feeling again with Iridescence, because this album really shows just how wild and creative they can get. Songs like Berlin, District, and Juve are some of the most blunt, cold-blooded, harsh, violent songs that they have in their entire discography. The oppressive, growling bass tone on Berlin is fucking wonderful. It sounds like a motorcycle revving up, but just like distorted. It gives the track just this really confrontational edge that I just really can't get enough of. And I love Dom's verse too. I liked his closing line. I thought he'd be another figure, but go figure, and figure is replaced with like, you know, the health monitor, like the flat line. His flow was great too, and the finish of the song is really artful with Joba's verse. Even though Joba did have a few sketchy lines on his verse, I like the general idea of just clinging on to this person that you just can't let go of, and that little ending line of, do you think about me? And then the instrumental goes all fucking wild. I think it just reflects the mental conflict that Joba is expressing in that verse. District opens up with some really gentle, warm strings before crashing into a really cold, skeletal fucking groove with a very catchy hook from Kevin, I think. Could be wrong on that. The auto-tune does kind of disguise it, so it could be like Bareface or something, but the whirring synth line on this track just gives this song a really fractured character that I just love, and the verses from Matt and Dom are fantastic. I loved both of their cadences on this track. They sounded really just eerie and cold-blooded. And lyrically, both verses seem to deal with the idea of letting the indulgence of success sort of take over at points. And I love how Joba's brief appearance on this track was so wild and sort of transitioned into the ending sequence, which is beautiful. It features these really sunny guitar melodies and a really awesome moment with Kevin where his vocals get really interestingly chopped up for a nice little outro. Thought it sounded really great. My favorite track at the moment is probably Juve, though. Joba? What the fuck, dude? First of all, this beat, mate, this fucking beat is just absolute filth. The rumbling bass on this track is so awesome, and when Merlin's verse comes in with that like squealing synth line, oh my god, it sounds so unhinged and fucking awesome. But Joba, wow, man, this dude, unbridled rage on this track. Jesus, he's just screaming away, just this absolute disgust for all the fucking shitheads in his life that have just belittled him again and again, causing him to resort to drugs as his only means of escape. It's just so tangible in this performance, man. I fucking love this verse. A really throttling moment on the album. He really goes in. The Lava Man sample in the middle of the track was really sick too, just kind of added to the song's character, and Bareface's very brief appearance was really catchy as well. The songs Tape and Wait are two of the more evocative and powerful personal songs on the album, and Kevin especially gets really introspective on these tracks. They both feature these really powerful breakbeat drums too that I think wonderfully complement the pain that's being expressed in the lyrics. On Tape, Kevin gets really transparent about how he feels he has himself to blame for not being there for his family due to the high demand of success and everything, and Joba gives his most troubled verse in his whole career. He harrowingly calls out to God on this track, just hoping for something to come and just stop him from going through all these horrible tragedies and all this mental torment. He just needs some kind of escape from it all. And on Wait, we hear Kevin confess the fears he had when he first discovered his sexuality as well. But the most powerful line on Kevin's verse on Wait has to be the one about Ashlyn Gray, which kind of alludes to self-harm. I thought that moment was really chilling, and I think when the drums come in on the track, it just gives the song such a powerful impact, and every time I hear it, I just get overwhelmed with this really uneasy just sense of fear and dread. It's a really powerful song. And I love Dom's verse on this track too, the way he sort of tackles and attacks the corruption and how some people can mislead you in the world and everything, and he seems really touched by it on this song. Just such a passionate verse. And then Joba's outro on this track is also one of my favorite moments on the whole record. I think it has a really disquieting atmosphere to it thanks to this vocal snippet from Sammy Joe. The final three ballads at the end of the album are also pretty moving, San Marcos being my personal favorite. The climax of this track was probably the most gorgeous thing I think I've ever heard from Brockhampton, period. I think this is a really stunning finish. I loved the repeated mantra of making the most out of your life. The way it's sung by this choir so angelically was really moving, and I thought just the general theme of this song, this essence of frustration that you just can't, you know, do everything you want to do in life because you're constantly being stopped by your own self-doubt, and whether you succumb to alcohol abuse or suicidal thoughts, all of it is just stopping you from experiencing life in the way you want to, and the way it's sort of beating everyone up on this track was really powerful. In regards to problems with this album, I do have a few. New Orleans, in my opinion, is a terrible intro. Probably my least favorite song. I don't get how the fuck some people are calling this one of the best tracks. It's an incredibly grating song. The beat gets old as fuck within like 1 minute, and it never switches up. It's a really undynamic song. It's not that interesting to me at all. None of the verses say anything interesting. Joba's verse had a cool flow, so I'll give it that. The hook was really half-assed as well. Nowhere near as sticky as some of the best cuts from the Saturation trilogy. It's just such an unprogressive and, you know, tame intro that just does nothing for me. I think when it transitions into Thug Life, we get something much more flavorful and passionate. The opening track doesn't do much for me. Something About Him was a pretty weak track to me. The beat definitely shooting for something very dreamy and pretty, but I think the kind of muddy drums and sort of flat mixing fails to really bring it to life in the way it wants to, and Kevin's auto-tune doesn't really quite sell the infatuation he's clearly portraying in the lyrics of this track too. Honey features a lead synth line that I find really redundant and unlikable personally. The little brief moment on this track with Merlin is easily the most unlistenable part of the whole album. It's a small moment, but fucking hell, it's just shit. Like, Merlin's auto-tune is just disgusting, and those chords that awkwardly pop in just don't fit in remotely. The switch up on Honey too with that bump sample just felt really forced and arbitrary to me, and the only thing this track I think has going for it has got to be the Dom verse. I really liked his flow and cadence on this track. The final two songs are solid though. They both feature some pretty powerful themes of crumbling at the pressure of fame, as well as everyone else around you, just due to the frustration and knowing that no one truly understands you. And, you know, some powerful lyrical themes here, but I think the decision to end the album off on 3 dramatic ballads made for a pretty sluggish finish. I think each one just kind of cheapens in impact. Joba's singing on the closing track felt a bit overly eccentric, kind of reminded me of something you'd hear on a Panic at the Disco album or something. There are a few weak lines I haven't touched on as well. A few transitions between songs were pretty awful, but ultimately, whilst this is definitely the most interesting album in their discography so far, its execution, it's frustratingly inconsistent. The album does feel a little bit fragmented and broken as a listening experience. The flow of this thing is a little bit shoddy, but I do think it still features some of the most daring production to date, and the group interplay is fantastic. The way they use Bareface was really interesting, because they kind of felt like it was just kind of using him in the same way on every song. Just kind of putting him at the end, he does some like dramatic, like, singing in that voice, you know, just doing the same thing. It kind of felt like Bareface didn't really have much range, but he's implemented really interestingly at points on this thing, so he does show a bit of versatility, which was pretty cool. Joba's going crazy. No, there's not really much of a key standout member, though. I feel like everyone sort of acts as one cohesive hive mind unit on this thing. Brockhampton really feel like a singular entity on this thing, you know? The chemistry and group interplay on this album is stronger than ever, but in this album's attempt to be very bold and unpredictable, it often fails to flesh out some of these really creative ideas, in my opinion. But I don't think it's enough to stop this from being one of the most exciting and fun things I've listened to in 2018, so I have no qualms giving this thing an 8 out of 10. I think it's fantastic. I think it's a really fun album. It's incredibly creative, it's incredibly exciting, it's daring, it's unpredictable, it's frantic, and sometimes that can be to its detriment, but my overall experience with this thing has been a total blast, so yeah, I'm rolling with an 8 on this thing. So yeah, thank you for watching my review. Hope you enjoyed it. I'll see you on the next one. Bye!